Hello everyone, and welcome to my tutorial of how to use Meshmixer with a particular focus on industrial design. Today I'm going to be showing you a crash course in how to use Meshmixer, and by the end of this tutorial the goal is that you'll be able to make a bunny like this one, or really apply a similar effect to any 3D file that you make in any other program. This program is kind of like a Swiss Army knife that has some incredibly powerful tools that allow you to bridge two programs together and bring your files between them, or prepare very weird geometry, say from a video game or 3D scan, and turn it into something you could 3D print or edit in CAD and then create in real life for, say, cosplay, for example. Getting into it, we'll start from scratch, because we've already made the bunny and that wouldn't be much of a tutorial otherwise. In fact, we have to pull up our objects browser and delete everything. There we go. So this is the opening menu. When you first download Meshmixer, which is very easy, it's not hard whatsoever. Just go to autodesk/meshmixer.com. They'll have it. You just click download for whatever your format is. I'm sure everyone has done that before, so we won't cover it. What we will cover, however, is these 6 buttons. Import lets you bring in an existing file that you've already made, so I could pick any of the ones I have here, and it will load up quite nicely. This is normally what you're going to be doing, actually, in this program. But in this case, I'm not going to bother, because it wouldn't be much of a tutorial if we all couldn't work on the same thing. Anytime you delete everything in the scene, it'll bring you back to the splash screen, by the way, hence why I keep doing that. Open lets you open existing Meshmixer files. If for some reason I want to bring back that bunny, I have a convenient little save of him, and we can come back to the actual Meshmixer file. That said, I don't find I use Meshmixer files all that much because it doesn't save any kind of design history. So really there's not a lot of point in using them, in my opinion. You could just save as an OBJ or STL instead. You also have options to change up your keyboard shortcuts, which I don't really bother with. Import plane, sphere, or you can start with the bunny. I suggest we all start with the bunny so that we have the same starting object. The bunny is actually got a little bit of history for the 3D printing world, or really 3D modeling in general. The bunny is called the Stanford Bunny, and he's a 3D test that was created in, I think, not in the 1990s. Basically, he's been around for a long time. He shows up in a lot of programs. You may have seen this model before. He is a 3D scan, and therefore he's a good way to demonstrate what you can do with existing good 3D scans. Getting a good quality start for whatever you're working on is probably going to be the best thing you can do, but if you can't get a quality start, then you can at least use Meshmixer to fix up what's wrong. And we're going to take this program from the top, specifically the View tab here. So there's only really 2 things I use in here. You can use Wireframe, which has a hotkey of W, and I like to keep Wireframe on most of the time because it lets me see more directly what I'm doing, and you'll see what I mean by that. But this is the true mesh. It's not the gray stuff, it's actually the black lines that is calculated by the program for what's being displayed to you and is used for doing all kinds of cool things. The other thing is the object browser. I like to leave that open, but you don't have to. It's just something you can tuck in the bottom of your screen and use occasionally for a variety of things. You also have your view cube, which is, it's an Autodesk view cube. You either have used this thing before or you're going to figure out very quickly. If you ever get like a really weird perspective, for example, hitting home will bring you back down here, and generally you're working in the build plate here. So that works out nicely. Alt and left click for me is how you pan around. Alt and right click is scale in and out. Alt and middle click is how you move the camera around. That said, you may want to rebind this. It may not even be the same thing on Apple. I'm currently using Windows, so it's pretty, you'll figure that part out pretty quick. It'll say in your documentation. Going further down, we have the import option. So I have 2 options if I want import. For some reason I want to mesh mix, i.e. the point of the program, at least originally, you can append to the file something that already exists. There's not really anything that we need to do this with, but for example, I'll throw in this file I made the other week for another class, and we could, if for some reason wanted to attach this to our bunny, we could do so in this program, like so. And then we could work as though these were one file and combine them and do things together with them. That could be powerful if, say, you have a 3D model of a pen and a 3D scan of, say, a rock or something, and you want to make a pen holder out of the rock. You can put the 3D model into the rock and create an actual cutout of it. Beyond that, though, probably as designers, you have better CAD programs to be using, so I don't really see why you would use this that often, but good to know it's here. Meshmix also, the counterpart is Meshmix, which is a bunch of pre-existing models that you can bring in and attach together, and these can be fun generally for making art pieces quickly, but you, again, probably have a better program for CAD modeling. And I'm sure we all know how a transform cube works, but scale is based on the little squares. This triangle-looking bit moves it on that the XY plane or the ZX plane, whichever plane you've selected. If you just move the arrow, it only moves up and down. Rotation is here, but if you go within this, you'll see it snaps. And that works for every mesh. You can also specify the exact size of something, which is probably one of the more useful things to do if for some reason, say I wanted to turn my bunny into a pen holder, I could drag a cylinder out onto the bunny. It'll attach to the mesh like it's glued on, and then I could say that I want to have a hold in him. I want to offset it down in. You see offset negative puts it more into the mesh, offset positive puts it more above the mesh, and then subtract, and boom, we could hypothetically store some snacks or a pen in there. That said, we don't really want that for what we're going to be trying to be making today, but good that you now know it. Select tool is where probably a lot of what you're going to be doing is done, especially if you're doing photogrammetry. Select tool has a brush. It's kind of like the sculpt tool, but nothing happens except that you have a highlighter that selects what's going to happen to certain areas. If you hit Control, it'll erase, by the way. I'm just going to go like that. We're going to select the back of the bunny. And in fact, I'm going to try to preserve his legs here. And say I feel that the back of the bunny is not all that complex, and I want to run some specific operations on it and not on the entire mesh, I can do so using this tool. It'll do a lot of the stuff that's in the edit tool already, actually, which we'll get to later, but it has more specific options. For example, erase and fill will erase literally all of those triangles and then refill it in a way that seems logical, which isn't a big difference, as you can see, but that's pretty powerful for if, say, I wanted to get rid of his ears. I have to back out, but say I like my bunnies earless, I can... There we go. And it's approximated what that would look like. Very powerful, but very limited circumstances where you want to use it. Beyond that, if we go back, there isn't a timeline, but Control-Zing works pretty good in this program. You can go back quite far. I guess that's every program, but that is the closest thing you have to a timeline, is my main point. Extrude will take a portion of selected geometry and extrude it out. Limited usage, but you'll see that we use it a couple times. I wouldn't really use this program as my primary CAD program, but this can be useful in some cases where you just need to get something done quick. We also should go over... Well, I guess all of these are actually pretty normal beyond flip normals. Unintended joke. Basically, what normals are, long story short, is that the inside of the bunny is supposed to be the inside. The program knows that. It has a rough idea of what's the inside and the outside. But if for some reason that was wrong because of a 3D scan or something, you could scan this, or you could select this and flip the normals automatically. It's rare that that would be useful, but it could be helpful for if, say, you're running the make solid command later and you have a particular issue with how it's creating whatever it's creating. That said, we don't actually want to do that. We can go over the reduce command, though. So reduce basically will take your existing triangles and decrease the amount of triangles that you have. It's pretty simple. You can see how it works pretty quick. And this works for everything selected. So you can get like very low poly looking results using this. The other advantage of this is, let's say we wanted to select our entire bunny. Say we wanted to bring this into Fusion 360 or another CAD program. We could use the reduce tool and lower the amount of triangles to a more acceptable amount of triangles for that incoming program. Usually the magic number I see is 10,000 triangles. Fusion 360 claims it'll handle 10,000. I think SolidWorks also. Probably most programs that's a good target to go for. If you switch to triangle count, which I did using this tab, rather than percentage, because I know the target number I want to go for, I can tell it, okay, you get 9,000 triangles to make it, and I'm going with 9,000 because it's good to leave some buffer room. You can even go with 9,500 if you really can't get the detail you want, but our bunny here is not that complex, so we're going to stick with it. And that did that to the entire mesh now. So now he's going to be a lot easier to process if we went into, say, Fusion 360. Next on the docket. So we've covered everything that you pretty much would want to use in the Select tab. Oh, the only other thing is maybe the lasso. Occasionally you're going to want to lasso part of the bunny, and it's going to select off the lasso instead. That's less useful when you're editing one mesh, and more useful if, say, you have a big mess from photogrammetric scanning. You could actually just lasso a bunch of individual meshes and hit delete, and that would be the quickest and easiest way to do that. That said, I don't think we need to do that today, so we're going to skip over it. Sculpt tab. Fun. A lot of great stuff you can do with the Sculpt tab. I've sculpted conch shells, I've sculpted skulls, I've sculpted a few things in here. Frankly, there's better programs to sculpt with than Meshmixer. That's not to knock Meshmixer. It is free. It works quite well. But I would recommend going to ZBrush or Sculptress or Maya, really any other option, just because those are purpose-built for doing what you want to do. That said, there is one really useful tool in here. And you can use all of these tools, to be clear. I would actually recommend you play with it because it's a fun way to model if you want to make something organic like the bunny. But the Adaptive Reduce tool is very, very useful. Depending on how you set the strength and everything, it will let you very specifically, without going through that whole select process, choose areas that you want to be lower in polygon count. And that's just a pretty convenient factor. I'm making quick art type thing to use, but it is very useful. So I'm showing it to you real quick. Oop, went a little too far there. And I'm just going to do this randomly. So if we want to achieve that Voronoi bunny, if you're following along, the logic that's going to be used there is the bigger the triangles that are there, the bigger your holes are going to be in the end. And that'll be very clear when we run the command. But for now, if you're following along, just select some artistic areas. Try not to make the whole thing with, low poly or anything. It's better to make it like that variation, like I'm doing. But it really is up to you. It's your art piece. And I'm just going to give it 2 quick clicks so we maybe get some cool geometry here and there. And all right, so that's all you really need to know about the sculpt space. I don't use anything else in here currently. The stamp space, probably one of the least useful tabs here, to be honest, besides maybe print, because I don't think I've ever seen anyone use print. The only thing that's really useful about it is if for some reason you want to use a stamp to edit and create what's called a face group, you can, and from the perspective it drew that hexagon, and then we could go back into, say, select, triple click the hexagon, and extrude that out. And that is your hexagon. I don't really see why you would want to use that, to be brutally honest, unless you specifically need a hexagon or some other stamp. But I've never had need for that because I would just use another program. Still, it's cool that it's there. Edit is where the majority of the other tools you're going to be using are. Besides all these, a lot of these are things you can explore on your own. They're pretty self-explanatory, but the most useful ones I use here are the transform tool, which is how you move things around. Let's say I decide, oh, my bunny shouldn't be 50 millimeters. I want him to be 100 millimeters. Keeping uniform scaling, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but that ensures uniform scale. If for some reason I click the box, that's not uniform scale. And in fact, you can do that to quickly make your mesh look, funky. And in fact, I think I'm going to leave that because that might give us some fun geometry later on. You'll notice that the bottom of our bunny is left open. And maybe if you've done photogrammetry before, you've seen similar stuff to this, where you have an issue. And this would not 3D print because this is not watertight. This is just not going to work for most slicer programs. What will make it work in this program, there's a couple options to make things watertight, is Make Solid. Make Solid will take an existing mesh and try to approximately create, and I do mean approximately because it's not perfect, a version of that mesh from a very similar look. It'll make a copy, basically, as close as it can, but there's a limit. You can go through the various kinds. Basically, as you go down the list, they get more and more computing intensive. I'm probably not even going to run these because they can take up to 5 minutes, even when you're working with good stuff. Some things in this program, while it's great for editing meshes, if you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of triangles, this program's just nothing is going to be able to handle that if this program can't handle it. So I would recommend reducing very large meshes before you try running anything like Make Solid first. Beyond that, you can play with these. Mesh density will make it a little more accurate also. Solid accuracy is how hard it tries to make something near the original model. Bumping up solid accuracy is probably a good idea. Mesh density, be very careful with. If we bump it up even a little, you'll notice that it takes longer and longer. And it's pretty quick. I have a decent computer, but it's pretty quick even on not so decent computers when I've used it. One clever trick, though, is you can do the reverse. You can actually lower the mesh density by a fair bit and get that low poly look that we've been kind of going for anyways. And that, because you're actually decimating the mesh to some degree, will also take a little while to do, but it is a good one-stop shop, but then you end up with something like this. Bumping up the mesh density even slightly would have fixed that, but I'm not going to bother because we don't need to make this solid. In fact, if you have run your thing to make solid, undo it. And you'll see, I'll explain why later on. Basically, you don't need a watertight mesh for what we're going to do to make the Voronoi bunny. That's all you need to know at this point. Beyond that, hollow's very useful, mostly for resin printing, frankly. I wouldn't use it otherwise. It could also be used in tandem with what we're going to do later for the Voronoi bunny, and you'll see why that might work when we get to it. Make pattern is actually how you do the Voronoi bunny, but we're not going to do that yet. Plain cut is instead what we're going to cover. It's really the last thing that I use a lot here. If for some reason I needed to 3D print my bunny and, I don't know, just place it arbitrarily, but say I wanted just the head for one reason or another, I can run that and it'll actually fill it in and cut off what I was working with there. Very, very useful for, say, if you get a rough bottom on your bunny after running some commands, or if you have a weird bit of geometry from a 3D scanner. Heck, I've even used to fix things from Fusion 360 because something went wrong in the export process and I didn't want to reopen Fusion. It's pretty accurate. You can also tell it to keep both. If for some reason you want to keep it, you'll see there's a line going all the way across, and then you can run the separate command right here, actually separate shells, and you'll get the two separate bodies. But in this case, we don't want that, so we're going to undo it again. The only other thing to show you real quick is if you draw a red line, or it's literally just clicking and dragging, it draws the line. I'm not holding any hotkey there. I just have to select anywhere on the screen, and it would cut it off. Very useful if, say, you want to make a video game character or a 3D print of like a person or a statue, and you want to cut off the arms and print them separately so they print better in a better orientation than glue them on. That's when I would use that specific feature a lot. Otherwise, not so much. Moving on, we get into... This is the kind of stuff that will save your butt if you need it, but I very rarely use it. For example, the inspector will... And actually, let's make this worse. The inspector will identify areas of missing geometry if it can. It's not perfect, but it will do its best to identify missing geometry and then automatically repair it for you. And you'll see that's not perfect. There's no way it could be perfect. This is where I was getting to in the beginning. You need a good starter mesh to get good results in this program, but this program is powerful enough to let you compensate for that if you need to. All that said, and you'll see the different colors, that means it's a different face group. All that means is if I select it, it will be selected when I triple click to select the whole thing. And by the way, to select everything, in case you missed that before, I triple click on something. Beyond that, though, I don't actually want these face groups because those are just in the way of what's going to be a cool bit of geometry. What I actually will do real quick is I'm just going to delete a little hole and leave it. And again, you'll see why later on. In fact, we'll delete a little bit over here too. So if you make a little bit of missing geometry, it won't generate stuff in that area, and that could be neat for the make pattern tool down the line. Beyond that, in analysis, I've used thickness occasionally. That can be useful if you're, say, 3D printing a statue. You can have it thicken certain things. It'll tell you if things are too thin. Measure lets you measure weird 3D scanned meshes. Overhangs lets you generate support if you for some reason can't use tree support in your existing slicer, but most slicers have tree support at this point, so I don't really know why you would use this at this point in time. It's just good to know that it exists. Beyond that, I don't really use anything else in this program, to be brutally honest. Or at least in this tab. I do, however, want to go over the shaders menu, and really the only thing that you can do with the shaders here is change the color, or you can use the, say, overhang shader and or the clear shader. It's good if you need to take a quick photo to send to a client, or just for yourself to post on Reddit, whatever. You can get a material that's closer than default gray, and we can hit W if we want to look at more realistically also. But that said, the shaders don't matter. There's better programs for coloring in your file. And now for the part you've all been waiting for. We go back to Edit, and I'm going to show you how to actually make a Voronoi bunny now that you've learned all the tools to do this to really any file. To be clear, what I just showed you will work with anything you've made. If you just want to take a cylinder and randomly change parts of it, and as long as you do the similar steps that we've been going over, this will all work fine. Go through Make Pattern. There's a ton of things in Make Pattern. The one I'm going to focus on is called Dual Edges. Click Dual Edges and you'll see, it should be pretty clear right now, what happened was this selected an area, or approximated the existing mesh, I should say, by the amount of triangles that were there. And if I just hit Update and Accept on this, or actually you could just hit Accept, but Update is a little less processing intensive, hence why you might want to use it down the line. It could take a minute or two to run through, and that's why playing with the settings can be worthwhile. But it will slowly calculate everything. And if we hadn't hit Accept, it actually would be taking less time right now. But as you can see, it takes a minute or so. You will see that it did leave these areas gapped out. There's nothing being generated there because there's nothing to generate from because we deleted it. And I think that looks cool for certain things. And there we go. And it's probably easier to see with W turned off. And now we just have a really cool artistic looking bunny. And I think this would be a great art piece to give to somebody. I think you could use this as a pencil holder if you stuck pens in here. Tons of things you could do. You'll notice that it went along with the mesh that we had, specifically. If we had made a solid bottom, there would also be this pattern on the bottom, and that would kind of just be a waste and print weird. So I don't know why you would do that. If we had gone with, say, the hollow out tool, which we can't actually do now because this is considered a watertight body, but you can run the hollow tool and then get like a second layer inside of the bunny, which probably will make things more complicated and harder to calculate, but you can do it if you want to. And in fact, we can bring back the old bunny. He's not gone. And there are other patterns in there I can just show you real quick. There's tons of these. Literally, I can't show you all of them. I would recommend you just play with them. Edges is cool. It's more geometric than the previous option. Tiled tubes is weird. I don't really know why you would use it, but I've seen some people do it. Lattice creates that weird structure. There's all kinds of things you can do with the Make Pattern tool. Play around with it. You can make quick art really quick. That said, let's show you how to actually get this out of this program and onto your 3D printer. So you'll notice that a lot of the times this is going to happen, but you'll notice that we have a rough bottom. Usually printer programs will have a way to clean up the rough bottom, usually by dropping it through the build plate and ignoring it, but you can actually take control over that. We can run plain cut, here we go, and just cut off the part of the geometry that we don't want precisely, and it will cut, and now you will notice we have a much cleaner bottom overall that's actually flat to each other. And that will 3D print a lot nicer than a bunch of tiny little points. Beyond that, this is ready to go, so we'll go into export and get into the last useful thing that this program can be used for. I don't know if you've ever used Convertio, but Convertio is a software, it's actually a website that lets you turn JPEGs to SVGs, a whole bunch of things. I like it a lot. I'm not affiliated with them, to be clear, but, you know, quick shout out because I use them a lot. Meshmixer is the 3D printing version of that, or 3D modeling in general. You can import as an STL, a Collada, a OBJ, whatever, and export as, well, whatever also, because that's just how this program works. It's a great translation program. I only use OBJ and STL. The rest of these are pretty specific. I would stick with the more basic versions of each, but I don't think it will specifically matter if you were to choose the wrong OBJ. Don't quote me on that, though. I have run into some weird issues, but usually it won't matter. 3MF is becoming big. If you're specifically looking to 3D print, maybe I would recommend that over STL. But really, the STL and OBJ are the standards. OBJ maintains colors. STL does not. It's a pure point cloud. I'm going to go with STL. Save as new bunny. And you can just hit continue. Basically what that's saying is it's either a high triangle object, or maybe there's a slight error that probably won't matter, but if for some reason you do get an error down the line and you got that, say in your slicer it says I can't print this, try going back in, running remesh, and doing a couple of the steps over with a slightly different result. That will probably fix that error real quick. Usually I don't get problems with it, though. In any case, just to show you what I was saying earlier, and it's really the last thing, is that if I want to bring in the file I just saved, it's actually going to be basically identical what I can do with it. So you don't really need to save as a Meshmixer file. You can just save as an STL if you feel like doing that. And we actually have two overlapping here, but you see they're the same thing. And we could even mesh mix these together and have a weird, I don't know, alien bunny that's combined. I wouldn't recommend that, actually. It would be kind of terrifying. We could, however, say, if we want to have a bunny mom and a bunny child. You could bring them together and quickly do something like that. But that's up to you. That is everything important that I have to cover in Meshmixer. It's one of my favorite programs. I love it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Peace.